My biological parents gave me up for adoption, then crashed my college graduation demanding I call them my real family. They went livid with my decision. I was adopted when I was 3 years old. My biological parents were 19 and 20 at the time, and they decided they weren't ready to raise a child. They signed the papers willingly. No one forced them. No one tricked them. They made a choice, and that choice gave me to the two people who became my real parents. My mom and dad adopted me after years of trying to have children on their own. They told me I was chosen. They told me I was wanted. They told me my story started the day I came home with them. I never felt like I was missing anything. I had a childhood full of birthday parties and family vacations and bedtime stories. I had parents who showed up to every school play and every soccer game and every award ceremony. I had a family that loved me completely. I knew I was adopted because my parents never hid it from me. They answered every question I had honestly. They said my biological parents were young and made a difficult decision. They said it didn't mean I wasn't loved. They said sometimes the people who give you life aren't the same people who raise you, and that was okay. I accepted that and moved on with my life. When I turned 18, I had the option to access information about my biological parents. I thought about it for a while and decided I wasn't interested. I had parents. I didn't need to go looking for more. I figured if my biological parents wanted to find me, they could reach out through the proper channels, and I would decide then how I felt. They never reached out. Not when I turned 18. Not when I turned 19 or 20. I assumed they had moved on with their lives just like I had moved on with mine. Then I graduated from college last spring. It was a big day for my family. My parents drove 4 hours to be there. My grandparents came. My aunt and uncle came. Everyone was so proud of me for being the first person in my family to finish a 4-year degree. After the ceremony, we were all standing outside taking pictures when 2 strangers walked up to our group, a man and a woman in their early 40s. They stood there staring at me with tears in their eyes. The woman said my name, not the name my parents gave me. The name that was on my original birth certificate before the adoption was finalized. I didn't respond because that wasn't my name. She said it again, and then said she was my mother. She said they had been looking for me for years. She said they made a mistake giving me up and they wanted to make things right. She said they were ready to be my parents now. My mom stepped forward and asked who these people were. The woman looked at her and said she was my real mother, and she was here to take me back. She said it like I was a borrowed item being returned to its rightful owner. My dad asked them to leave. The man who was apparently my biological father got angry. He said they had every right to be there. He said I was their flesh and blood and no piece of paper could change that. He said they spent 20 years regretting their decision, and they weren't going to waste any more time. He said I belonged with them. I stood there frozen while my 2 families faced each other. My biological mother kept trying to touch my arm. She kept calling me by that old name. She kept saying things like, "We have so much to catch up on, and I can't wait to show you where you really come from." My mom was shaking. My dad looked like he was ready to physically remove these people. My grandparents didn't know what to do. My graduation day turned into a confrontation in a parking lot. I finally found my voice. I told them to stop. I told them I didn't know them. I told them the people standing behind me were my parents and they needed to leave. My biological mother started crying. She said I was confused. She said the people who raised me had brainwashed me against her. She said if I just gave her a chance, I would see that she was my real family. She said blood was thicker than water, and I would understand that eventually. She said they had been watching me from a distance for years, waiting for the right moment to reconnect. I asked what she meant by watching me. She said they found me online a few years ago. They saw my high school graduation pictures. They saw my social media posts. They knew what college I attended. They knew what I was studying. They had been following my life without ever reaching out directly, because they wanted to wait until I was old enough to make my own decisions. I told them they made their choice 2 decades ago, and I was making my choice now. I told them they made their choice 2 decades ago, and I was making my choice now. My biological father's face turned red, and he started yelling about how ungrateful I was. He said they gave me life, and I owed them at least a conversation. My dad stepped between us and told him if he didn't leave immediately, he was calling campus security. My biological mother grabbed her husband's arm and pulled him back, still crying and saying my birth name over and over like it would somehow make me respond. They finally started walking away, but she kept turning around to look at me. My whole body was shaking. Kayla put her arm around my shoulders and asked if I was okay. I couldn't answer because I didn't know. My mom looked like she wanted to either cry or scream or maybe both at the same time. Her hands were trembling and she kept opening and closing them like she didn't know what to do with them. My grandparents just stood there looking shocked. My aunt had her phone out like she'd been ready to call the police. The other families who had been taking pictures nearby were staring at us. I felt like everyone had just watched me get ambushed on what was supposed to be one of the best days of my life. We ended up going back to my parents' hotel room instead of the nice restaurant where we had lunch reservations. Nobody knew what to say at first. We all just sat there in this uncomfortable silence. My dad kept pacing back and forth between the window and the door. He kept muttering things about restraining orders and harassment and how those people had no right. My grandparents sat on the couch looking stunned. My grandma kept reaching over to pat my hand, but she didn't say anything. My aunt kept checking her phone like she was looking something up. My mom sat next to me on the bed and I could feel her shaking even though she was trying to hold it together. Kayla texted her parents because they're both retired. Her dad used to be a cop and her mom was a therapist before she retired. She stepped out into the hallway to call them and came back about 10 minutes later with actual advice instead of just anger and confusion. Kayla said her parents recommended we document everything that happened while it was still fresh in our minds. They said we should write down every word we could remember and take photos of anyone who might have witnessed what happened. They said if my biological parents tried to contact me again, we'd want a record of this first incident. My dad immediately grabbed the hotel notepad and pen from the desk. I started writing down everything I could remember from the parking lot. What my biological mother said when she first walked up. What my biological father said when my dad asked them to leave. How she kept using that name from my birth certificate. How they said they'd been watching me online for years. My mom sat next to me and made a timeline of when they said what. She wrote down that they approached us right after the ceremony ended while we were taking pictures. She noted that they knew where I went to college and what I was studying even though I never told them. She wrote down that they claimed to have been following my social media without ever reaching out directly. My dad went back to the graduation venue with my uncle. They took photos of the parking lot where the confrontation happened. They got contact information from 2 other families who had been standing nearby taking pictures when my biological parents walked up. One mom said she heard the whole thing and would be happy to write down what she witnessed if we needed it. Another dad said he took a video of his own daughter and accidentally caught part of our confrontation in the background. He offered to send us the file. My dad thanked them both and came back to the hotel with their phone numbers and email addresses. He looked relieved to have something concrete to do instead of just sitting around feeling angry and helpless. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about what my biological mother said about watching me for years. I grabbed my phone and started going through all my social media accounts. My Instagram was public. My Facebook was mostly public except for some privacy settings I'd set up in high school. My Twitter was completely open. I went back through years of posts trying to figure out how much of my life they could see. They could see my high school graduation photos from 4 years ago. They could see pictures from family vacations and birthday parties. They could see posts about getting accepted to college and choosing my major. They could see photos of me and Kayla at football games and campus events. They could see everything. I felt sick looking at my own photos knowing these strangers had been scrolling through them and collecting information about me without my knowledge or permission. It felt like a different kind of invasion. Like they'd been standing outside my window watching me live my life. I got up early because I still couldn't sleep. I went through every social media account I had and changed all my privacy settings to private or friends only. I went through my friend lists and blocked anyone I didn't personally know. I found 3 friend requests that had been sitting in my pending folder. All 3 accounts had generic names and no profile pictures. One was from 2 years ago. One was from 18 months ago. One was from last year. I stared at those blank profiles and realized they might have been my biological parents trying to get closer to me, trying to see more of my private posts or my friend lists. I deleted all 3 requests and then blocked the accounts. I changed my username on Instagram. I made my Twitter completely private. I went through and untagged myself from old photos where other people had tagged me. I spent 3 hours scrubbing my online presence and I still didn't feel safe. My parents drove me back to my apartment near campus later that morning. My lease was ending in 2 weeks anyway, so they helped me start packing. We were all jumpy. Every time a car drove past the building, my dad would look out the window. Every time someone walked by in the hallway, my mom would tense up. I kept expecting my biological parents to somehow know where I lived and show up at my door. We packed boxes and didn't talk much. The silence felt heavy, but nobody knew what to say. My dad kept checking his phone like he was waiting for something. My mom kept organizing and reorganizing things that were already organized. I just wanted to get out of this apartment and away from this town where my biological parents now knew I lived. 2 days later, I got a Facebook message request. It was from an account under my biological mother's name with her photo. I didn't open it right away. I just stared at the notification for about 20 minutes trying to decide what to do. Finally, I opened it. It was a long letter about how she never stopped thinking about me. How she wondered every day what I looked like and what I was doing. How giving me up was the hardest thing she ever did, and she regretted it every single day for 20 years. How she and my biological father got married a year after the adoption and had 2 more kids, but I was always the one she thought about. How she hoped I would give her a chance to explain everything. At the bottom of the message were 3 photos attached. Baby photos of me that I had never seen before. Photos from before the adoption was finalized. Me in a hospital bassinet. Me wrapped in a pink blanket that I didn't recognize. Me being held by someone whose face was cut off in the photo but was probably her. Looking at those photos made my stomach hurt. I didn't respond to the message, but I took screenshots of everything. I sent them to my parents in a group text. My mom called me within 2 minutes. I could hear in her voice how much it hurt her that these people had photos from a time when she wasn't there. Photos from before I was hers. She tried to sound calm, but I could tell she was crying. She asked if I was okay. I said I didn't know. She said I didn't have to respond to anything, and I should just keep documenting everything in case we needed it later. We stayed on the phone for almost an hour. She told me stories about the day they brought me home from the foster family who had me between my biological parents and my adoption. She told me about the first time I called her mama. She told me about my third birthday party, which was the first birthday I spent with them. She was trying to remind me that I had a whole life with them that mattered more than 3 baby photos from people I didn't know. Kayla came over that afternoon and found me crying on my couch surrounded by half-packed moving boxes. I showed her the message and the photos. She read the whole thing and then got angry on my behalf. She said it was manipulative to send baby photos like that. Like those photos were supposed to create some kind of obligation or emotional connection that would make me feel guilty for not wanting a relationship. She said my biological mother was trying to make me feel like I owed her something when I didn't owe her anything at all. She helped me finish packing and ordered pizza and put on a movie and didn't leave until almost midnight. She made me promise to call her if they contacted me again. I promised, even though I hoped they wouldn't. The next morning, I woke up to another notification. My biological father sent a separate message through Facebook. He wrote that they just wanted to meet for coffee. He said they would respect my boundaries and only wanted one conversation to explain why they made the choice they did all those years ago. He promised they wouldn't push for anything more than that. He said they understood I had parents, but they needed me to understand their side of the story. Reading his message made my hands shake. Part of me wondered if maybe one conversation would make them stop. Maybe if I just listened to what they had to say, they would finally leave me alone. I screenshot the message and sent it to my parents. Then I called my dad. He picked up on the second ring, and I could hear the concern in his voice when he said my name. I asked him if he thought I should meet them just to get closure. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. My dad took a breath and reminded me that I already told them no in the parking lot. He said I made my position clear and I didn't owe them anything. He said I didn't owe them an explanation for my decision or a chance to explain theirs. He asked me if I actually wanted to meet them, or if I just felt guilty for saying no. I realized he was right. I didn't want to hear their story. I just wanted them to stop making me feel bad for having boundaries. My dad told me that guilt was a tool manipulative people used to get what they wanted. He said my biological parents were trying to make me feel responsible for their feelings when I wasn't. I thanked him, and we talked for another 20 minutes about other things. Normal things like my job search and whether I wanted to come home for a weekend visit. When we hung up, I felt better. I deleted both messages without responding to either one. 3 days passed without any contact. I started to think maybe they got the message. Then I got a notification that someone commented on one of my Instagram posts. It was an old post from 6 months ago. A photo of me at a coffee shop with a book. My biological mother wrote underneath it. The comment said she was so proud of me and that I was beautiful. I stared at the words, feeling sick to my stomach. It felt like she was marking territory or something. Like she was trying to claim ownership of me in public where other people could see. I went through my Instagram and realized I still had some posts set to public from before I made everything private. She must have been going through my old photos looking for anything she could access. I blocked both of them on Instagram immediately. Then I went through every other platform I could think of. Twitter, LinkedIn, even my old Snapchat account I barely used anymore. I blocked every account that might be theirs and changed all my privacy settings to maximum. But blocking them on social media didn't feel like enough. They had my phone number. They could still call or text whenever they wanted. I called my parents that afternoon and told them I wanted to change my phone number. My mom didn't even hesitate. She said they would pay for the new number and we would only give it to people I actually trusted. My dad drove up the next day with a new phone. We went to the store together and got me set up with a completely new number. We made a list of everyone who needed the new contact information. My parents, my grandparents, my aunt and uncle, Kayla, and a few other close friends from college. Nobody else. My dad helped me send out a message explaining that I changed numbers and asking people not to share it with anyone without checking with me first. The new phone felt like a fresh start. Like maybe I could finally move forward with my life without constantly looking over my shoulder. 2 weeks later, I started my new job at a marketing firm in the city. The office was modern with big windows and an open floor plan. My boss seemed nice during the interview, and my coworkers were friendly when they showed me around on my first day. I had my own desk with a computer and a view of the street below. Everything felt professional and normal. For the first week, I threw myself into learning the company systems and meeting the team. I worked on small projects and attended meetings and tried to prove I deserved to be there. Nobody knew about my situation with my biological parents. I was just the new hire fresh out of college trying to make a good impression. Then on my 8th day at work, the receptionist called my desk. She sounded uncomfortable when she said a woman claiming to be my mother had stopped by asking for me. My stomach dropped. I asked her what the woman looked like, and the receptionist described my biological mother perfectly. I told her I wasn't available and asked her to tell the woman to leave. The receptionist said the woman had already left, but she had left something at the front desk. I went downstairs feeling nauseous. There was a huge bouquet of flowers sitting on the reception counter, pink roses and white lilies in a clear vase. Next to them was a card in a small envelope. The receptionist handed me the card, and I opened it with shaking hands. Inside, my biological mother had written her phone number and an address. She wrote that she lived just 20 minutes from my workplace and she hoped I would visit sometime. She signed it with the word mom in curly handwriting. I took the flowers and the card back to my desk. Then I went straight to my boss's office. I knocked on her door and asked if she had a few minutes to talk. She could tell something was wrong by the look on my face. I sat down and explained the situation as clearly as I could. I told her about the adoption and the graduation confrontation and the messages, and now this. I said I was worried they might show up again and cause a scene. I didn't want my personal problems to affect my job, but I needed her to know what was happening. My boss listened to everything without interrupting. When I finished, she said she appreciated me telling her, and that my safety was the priority. She said she would alert building security right away. She asked if I had photos of my biological parents, and I pulled up their Facebook pages on my phone. She took screenshots and said she would send them to the security team with instructions not to let them into the building. She told me to come to her immediately if they showed up again or if I felt unsafe. I thanked her and went back to my desk feeling relieved that at least my workplace knew what was happening. That weekend, my mom drove up to visit me. We decided to have lunch at a restaurant near my apartment. It was a casual place with outdoor seating and good sandwiches. We got a table by the window and ordered food and talked about my new job. My mom seemed happy that I was settling into the city. Then her whole body went rigid. She was looking past me toward the entrance and her face went pale. I turned around and saw my biological parents walking into the restaurant. They were scanning the room like they were looking for someone. My biological mother spotted me and her face lit up. They started walking toward our table. I stood up before they could reach us. My voice came out louder than I intended, but I wanted other diners to hear. I told them they needed to leave me alone. I said showing up at places where I was at wasn't reconciliation. I said it was stalking. My biological father stopped walking and held up his hands like he was trying to calm me down. He said this was just a coincidence. He said they were just grabbing lunch and happened to see me. But the restaurant was 40 minutes from the address my biological mother had written on that card. The address where she said she lived 20 minutes from my workplace in the opposite direction. Other customers were definitely watching now. An older couple at the next table had stopped eating. A family with kids near the back was staring. The manager came over from behind the counter. He was a middle-aged guy with a concerned expression. He asked if there was a problem. My biological mother's face changed completely. The tears got bigger and she turned to the manager with her hand on her chest. She told him I was her daughter who was stolen from her years ago. She said the woman sitting across from me had taken me and poisoned my mind against her. She said she just wanted her baby back. My mom stood up slowly. Her voice came out calm and steady, even though I could see her hands shaking. She told the manager these people were harassing us and we would like them removed from the restaurant. The manager looked between my biological mother, who was sobbing, and my mom, who was standing there with her shoulders back. He asked my biological parents if they had a reservation. My biological father said they didn't need one because this was a family emergency. The manager said he was going to have to ask them to leave. My biological father's face turned red. He pointed at me and said they weren't going anywhere without their daughter. The manager pulled out his phone and said he would call the police if they didn't leave right now. My biological mother grabbed my biological father's arm. She was still crying, but she started walking toward the door. My biological father followed her, but he stopped and turned around. He looked right at me and said they weren't giving up on me. He said I would understand someday when I had my own kids. Then they were gone. The manager came back to our table and asked if we were okay. My mom thanked him and said we were fine. He said our meal was on the house and if those people came back, he would call the police immediately. We sat back down, but I couldn't eat. Everything on my plate tasted like nothing. My mom tried to take a bite of her sandwich, but I saw her put it back down. My hands wouldn't stop shaking. I put them under the table so the other customers wouldn't see. My mom reached across and touched my arm. She asked if I wanted to leave. I nodded. We got up and walked out to the parking lot. I kept looking around, expecting to see my biological parents waiting by the car. They weren't there. We drove back to my apartment in silence. When we got inside, my mom made tea even though neither of us drank it. We sat on my couch and she asked me what I wanted to do. I said I didn't know. She said we should talk to a lawyer about options for making them stop legally. I asked her if that was really necessary. She said showing up at my workplace and now following us to a restaurant wasn't normal behavior. She said it was going to get worse if we didn't do something. I knew she was right. My mom called her friend who recommended someone. A family law attorney named Nicole Holloway who handled harassment and stalking cases. My mom got me an appointment for the following Tuesday. The next few days I jumped every time my phone buzzed. I checked the windows before leaving my apartment. I took different routes to work. On Tuesday morning, I drove to Nicole's office in a building downtown. The waiting room had gray chairs and magazines about home decorating. A woman came out and introduced herself. She had dark hair pulled back and wore a blue suit. She shook my hand and led me to her office. The office had a big desk and shelves full of law books. She told me to sit down and asked me to explain what was happening. I started with graduation and told her everything. The parking lot confrontation, the Facebook messages, the flowers at work, the restaurant. She took notes the whole time. When I finished, she put down her pen. She said biological parents often felt entitled to access even after adoption. She said that entitlement could escalate into dangerous behavior. She asked if they had ever threatened me directly. I said no, but the way they talked about me made me feel like property. She nodded and wrote something else down. Nicole explained I could send a cease and desist letter first. She said it would clearly state I didn't want any contact, and that further attempts would be considered harassment. If they continued after that, we could pursue a restraining order. She asked detailed questions about every interaction. What exact words did they use? What time did they show up at my work? How long did they stay at the restaurant? I answered everything, but halfway through, I realized how much this had already escalated. It had only been 3 weeks since graduation. 3 weeks, and they had found my workplace, followed me to lunch, and contacted my extended family. Nicole must have seen something on my face because she stopped writing. She said I was doing the right thing by taking action now. She said people like this didn't usually stop on their own. We spent the next hour drafting the cease and desist letter. Nicole read parts of it out loud to make sure the language was clear. The letter stated I was an adult who had been legally adopted as a child. It said I had clearly communicated I didn't want contact with my biological parents. It said any further attempts to contact me directly or indirectly would be considered harassment. It said I would pursue legal action if they didn't stop. Nicole said she would send it via certified mail, so we had proof they received it. I signed the letter and wrote a check for her retainer. Walking out of her office, I felt better and worse at the same time. Better because someone was finally taking this seriously. Worse because I needed a lawyer to make my own biological parents leave me alone. For 5 days, nothing happened. My phone stayed quiet. Nobody showed up at work. I didn't see them anywhere. I started to hope the legal letter had scared them off. Maybe they finally understood I was serious. Maybe they would move on and leave me alone. On Saturday morning, I was getting ready to go grocery shopping when my phone rang. It was the doorman from my apartment building. He said a woman was in the lobby asking for me. He said she claimed to be my mother, but he wanted to check before sending her up. I asked him what she looked like. He described my biological mother. My stomach dropped. I told him not to let her up. I said she wasn't supposed to be contacting me and I would call the police. He said he would keep her in the lobby. I hung up and pulled up my building's security app on my phone. The camera showed my biological mother standing near the front desk. She was holding a gift bag with tissue paper sticking out the top. She kept looking at the elevator. The doorman was standing between her and the elevator bank. I called the police and gave them my address. I explained about the cease and desist letter and said my biological mother was currently in my building. The dispatcher said officers were on their way. I watched the security camera while I waited. My biological mother started crying again. She kept talking to the doorman and pointing up toward where my apartment was. He shook his head. After about 15 minutes, she sat down in one of the lobby chairs. She put the gift bag on her lap and stared at the elevator. 5 minutes later, she got up and tried walking toward the elevator. The doorman stepped in front of her. She sat back down. 20 minutes after I called, 2 police officers walked into the lobby. My biological mother stood up fast. One officer talked to the doorman while the other one talked to her. I couldn't hear what they were saying, but I saw her crying and gesturing. The officer took notes. Then my biological mother picked up the gift bag and walked out of the building. The officers stayed in the lobby for a few more minutes talking to the doorman. My phone rang. One of the officers asked if I could come down to give a statement. I grabbed my keys and took the elevator down. The officers were waiting near the front desk. They asked me to explain the situation, and I told them about the adoption, the graduation confrontation, and the cease and desist letter. I showed them the letter on my phone where Nicole had emailed me a copy. They took down all the information and gave me a case number. One officer said this combined with the cease and desist letter would strengthen my case for a restraining order. He said they would increase patrols past my building. He gave me a card with a direct number to call if my biological parents returned. The other officer asked the doorman to make a note in the building log about what happened. I thanked them and went back upstairs. The gift bag was still sitting on the lobby chair where my biological mother had left it. I didn't want to know what was inside. That night, my dad called. I told him what happened, and he said he was driving up to stay with me. I told him I needed to handle this myself. We argued for a few minutes before compromising. He would come up for the weekend and help me install additional locks on my apartment door. He would also help me set up a video doorbell, so I could see who was outside before opening the door. He said he would feel better knowing I had extra security. I agreed because I knew he needed to do something. The next morning, he showed up with a bag full of locks and tools. We spent the afternoon installing everything. The new deadbolt was stronger than my old one. The video doorbell connected to my phone so I could see and talk to whoever was at my door. My dad tested everything twice to make sure it worked. Before he left, he made me promise to call if anything else happened. I promised. After he drove away, I sat in my apartment looking at all the new locks. Part of me felt safer. Part of me felt scared that I needed them at all. I met with Nicole 3 days after the police report. She sat across from me in her office and laid out everything we could do legally. The temporary restraining order would go through fast, maybe within a week. It would stop my biological parents from coming near me or contacting me while we waited for the full court hearing. The hearing would be scheduled about 3 weeks out, and that's where a judge would decide if the restraining order should last longer. Nicole asked me detailed questions about every interaction. She wrote down dates and times and what exactly was said. She asked if I had any messages or emails saved. I pulled up the Facebook message from my biological mother on my phone and let Nicole screenshot it. She also asked about witnesses. I told her about Kayla seeing the graduation confrontation and my mom being there at the restaurant. Nicole said those witness statements would help. We filed the paperwork that afternoon, and Nicole said she would call me as soon as the temporary order was approved. I left her office feeling like something was finally moving forward instead of just happening to me. The temporary order came through 4 days later. Nicole called and said my biological parents had been officially served with the paperwork. They couldn't come within 500 feet of me or my apartment or my workplace. They couldn't call or text or message me on any platform. If they violated the order, they could be arrested. Nicole said the court date was set for 3 weeks from now and she would prepare all our evidence. I thanked her and sat on my couch staring at my phone. For the first time since graduation, I felt like I could breathe a little. 2 days later, Nicole called again. Her voice was different this time. She said my biological parents had hired a lawyer. Their lawyer sent her a letter that morning. Nicole read parts of it to me over the phone. The letter said my biological parents just wanted a relationship with their daughter. It said they were grieving parents who made a difficult choice 20 years ago and deserved a chance to know me. It said the adoption agency told them they could reach out when I turned 18. It said they never meant to scare me, and they were willing to go through proper channels to establish contact. Nicole stopped reading and asked how I felt about it. I told her it made me angry because they weren't going through proper channels. They showed up at my graduation uninvited. They followed me to a restaurant. They came to my workplace. They stood in my apartment lobby. Those weren't proper channels. Nicole said she agreed, and that their lawyer was trying to make them look sympathetic. She said we would counter everything in court with the evidence of their actual behavior. Nicole asked me to write a detailed statement for the court. She wanted everything about why I felt threatened, and why I needed the restraining order. She said to include specific examples and how their actions affected my daily life. I spent the next 2 days writing it. I started with the graduation and worked through every incident. I wrote about how I couldn't focus at work because I kept watching the door. I wrote about how I installed extra locks on my apartment and checked the security cameras constantly. I wrote about changing my phone number and making all my social media private. I wrote about being scared to go to the grocery store or meet friends for dinner because I didn't know where they might show up next. When I finished the statement, it was 4 pages long. Reading it back made me realize how much space this had taken up in my head. Graduation happened 2 months ago, and I had barely thought about anything else since then. I was supposed to be excited about my new job and my new apartment and starting my adult life. Instead, I was writing legal statements about people I didn't want to know. My mom called me on a Thursday night. I could tell she was crying before she even said anything. She asked if I had seen what my biological mother posted. I said no and asked what she meant. My mom said my biological mother found my aunt on Facebook and sent her a long message. My aunt didn't know what to do, so she forwarded it to my mom. My mom read parts of it out loud and her voice kept breaking. The message said my parents stole me and poisoned me against my real family. It said the adoption was a mistake and never should have happened. It said my biological mother wanted her daughter back and my parents had no right to keep us apart. It said my aunt should help convince me to give my biological parents a chance because family is family. My mom stopped reading and I heard her crying harder. She apologized for calling me upset, but she didn't know what to tell my aunt. I felt my chest get tight. I told my mom this wasn't her fault and she didn't steal me. I told her to tell my aunt to block my biological mother and not respond. My mom said okay, and we stayed on the phone for a while without saying much. Before we hung up, she asked if I was okay. I said I was fine, but we both knew I was lying. I called Kayla the next morning. I told her about the message to my aunt and how guilty I felt. My extended family was getting dragged into this mess because of me. Kayla cut me off and said that wasn't true. She said my biological parents were the ones doing the dragging. They were the ones choosing to contact my family members. They were the ones escalating and ignoring boundaries. She said I told them no at graduation, and they should have respected that. Everything after that was their choice. I knew she was right, but I still felt bad that my aunt had to deal with a crazy message from a stranger. Kayla reminded me that my aunt loves me and would want to protect me. She said my family would rather deal with some Facebook messages than see me harassed. That helped a little. My aunt texted me that afternoon. She said she blocked my biological mother and reported the message to Facebook. She said I was her niece no matter what biology said. She said she watched me grow up and she knew who my real parents were. She said if my biological parents contacted her again, she would handle it, and I shouldn't worry. I thanked her and told her I loved her. Her message made me feel better, but I hated that she had to deal with it at all. She had nothing to do with any of this. She was just trying to support me, and now she was getting harassed too. The court date finally arrived. I met Nicole at the courthouse an hour early. She had a folder full of printed evidence and a list of everything she wanted to present. We went through it one more time while we waited. Nicole said to stay calm when I testified and just tell the truth about how their behavior made me feel. She said the judge would ask me direct questions and I should answer clearly without getting emotional if possible. I nodded, but my hands were shaking. We walked into the courtroom and I saw my biological parents sitting on the other side with their lawyer. My biological mother looked at me and tried to smile. My biological father stared at me like he was trying to make me look back. I focused on Nicole's notepad and the papers in front of her. The judge came in and everyone stood up. My heart was beating, so hard I thought everyone could hear it. My biological mother testified first. She sat in the witness chair and her lawyer asked her questions. She talked about being 19 and scared when she got pregnant. She talked about the adoption agency telling her it was the right choice. She said she went to therapy for years dealing with the grief of giving me up. She cried while she talked about wondering what I looked like and if I was happy. She said the adoption agency told her she could reach out when I turned 18. She said she waited until I graduated college because she wanted me to be mature enough to understand. She said she just wanted the chance to know me and she never meant to scare me. Her lawyer asked if she loved me and she said yes through tears. She said I was her daughter and she thought about me every day for 22 years. The judge listened and took notes. I sat there feeling sick. Nicole stood up when it was her turn. She had photos printed from the graduation day. She had the police report from the restaurant. She had the incident report from my workplace. She had the security footage from my apartment building. She laid everything out in order and showed the pattern. She pointed out that my biological parents didn't reach out through the adoption agency. They didn't send a letter or ask for mediation. They showed up at my graduation and caused a scene. They followed me to a restaurant when that didn't work. They came to my workplace. They appeared at my apartment building. Nicole showed the Facebook message my biological mother sent me with the baby photos. She showed the message sent to my aunt. She asked the judge to note that each incident happened after I clearly said I didn't want contact. The judge looked at all the evidence and his expression changed. He looked at my biological parents and then back at the papers. Then it was my turn to testify. I walked up to the witness chair and promised to tell the truth. Nicole asked me to explain what happened at graduation. I told the judge about the parking lot confrontation and how they used my birth name. I explained that I told them no and asked them to leave. Nicole asked what happened after that. I described the restaurant and the workplace visit and the apartment building. I explained how I installed extra locks and a video doorbell. I talked about checking security cameras and being afraid to leave my apartment. The judge asked me directly if I wanted any contact with my biological parents. I said no. He asked if I ever gave them reason to think I wanted contact. I said no. He asked how their behavior made me feel. I said it made me afraid in my own home and workplace. I said I already have parents who raised me and loved me. I said my biological parents gave me up 22 years ago, and I respect that choice, but I don't want them in my life now. The judge thanked me, and I went back to sit with Nicole. My biological mother was crying again. My biological father looked angry. I kept my eyes on the table in front of me and waited for the judge to decide. The judge looked through all the papers one more time and then set them down on his desk. He picked up his pen and wrote something on the order form in front of him. My biological mother was still crying, and her lawyer put his hand on her shoulder. My biological father sat perfectly still with his jaw clenched tight. The judge looked up at all of us and started reading from the paper. He granted a restraining order for 1 full year starting today. No contact of any kind. No phone calls, no messages, no emails, no letters, no showing up at my home or workplace, no third-party contact through other people, no indirect contact of any kind. If they came within 500 feet of me, it would be a violation. If they contacted anyone in my family, it would be a violation. The judge said the evidence showed a clear pattern of boundary violations and escalating behavior. He said my biological parents had multiple opportunities to respect my clearly stated wishes, and they chose not to. He said a restraining order was necessary to protect my safety and peace of mind. My biological parents both turned to look at me when he finished reading. My biological mother's face was red and wet from crying. My biological father looked angry, but also confused, like he genuinely thought the judge would side with them because we shared DNA. Their lawyer started gathering his papers and whispering to them. I heard him say something about how they needed to take this seriously now. Nicole touched my arm and asked if I was okay. I nodded, but I felt shaky all over. We walked out of the courthouse into the afternoon sun. My legs felt weak and I had to stop on the steps to catch my breath. Nicole stood next to me and waited while I pulled myself together. She said I did really well in there and the judge clearly understood the situation. Then she said something that made my stomach drop. She said some people violate restraining orders. She said I needed to stay alert and document anything that happened. If they contacted me at all, I should call the police immediately and save any evidence. She said violations could result in arrest, but that didn't always stop people who felt entitled to access. I asked her if she thought they would try to contact me again. She said she couldn't predict what they would do, but the pattern of behavior suggested they didn't respect boundaries. She gave me her card again and told me to call her anytime, day or night, if anything happened. I put the card in my wallet and watched her walk to her car. 2 weeks went by without any contact from my biological parents. I checked my phone constantly for the first few days, expecting messages or calls. I looked over my shoulder in parking lots. I scanned every restaurant and coffee shop for their faces, but nothing happened. My apartment building manager knew about the restraining order and had their photos at the front desk. My workplace security had their information. I started to relax a little bit. Work was going well and I was getting better at my job every day. I made friends with 2 women in my department and we started having lunch together. One of them invited me to her birthday party that weekend. I went and met more people and felt like I was finally building a normal life. My parents called me every few days to check in, and I could tell they were worried but trying not to show it. I told them I was fine and I meant it. For the first time in weeks, I could focus on my career and my future instead of constantly looking behind me. Then I came home from work on a Tuesday, and found an envelope taped to my apartment door. No return address, no stamp. Just my name written in handwriting I didn't recognize. My hand started shaking as I pulled it off the door. I went inside and locked all 3 locks before I opened it. Inside was a long handwritten letter on lined notebook paper. The handwriting was messy and rushed. It was from my biological mother. She wrote that the judge didn't understand the situation. She wrote that I was her daughter no matter what any court said. She wrote that she knew I was confused and scared, but she would wait as long as it took for me to come around. She wrote that she thought about me every single day for 22 years, and she wasn't going to give up now. She wrote that blood was thicker than water, and eventually I would realize that. She wrote that she loved me and she would always love me no matter what. The letter was 3 pages long and got more desperate sounding with each paragraph. At the bottom, she wrote that she understood I needed time, but she would be here whenever I was ready. I took photos of the envelope and the letter with my phone. Then I put everything in a plastic bag and drove straight to the police station. The officer at the desk remembered me from before. I showed him the letter and explained about the restraining order. He made copies of everything and added it to my case file. He said they would contact my biological mother's lawyer to warn her that she had already violated the order. He said if it happened again, she could be arrested. I asked him how she knew where I lived since I moved after the restraining order was granted. He said she probably followed me from work or asked around. He said people who violate restraining orders often do surveillance first. That made me feel sick. I drove home checking my mirrors the whole way. 3 days later, I was at work when an email came through to my work address. The subject line said, "Please read this." It was from my biological father. He wrote that my biological mother was devastated by the restraining order. He wrote that I was being cruel and unreasonable. He wrote that family was supposed to forgive each other, and I was acting like they had abused me when all they did was love me. He wrote that they gave me life and I owed them at least a conversation. He wrote that my adoptive parents had poisoned me against them. He wrote that if I would just give them one chance, I would see they were good people who made a mistake when they were young. He wrote that they had rights as my biological parents, and no court could take that away. The email was even longer than the letter, and it made me angry instead of scared. I forwarded it to Nicole, and then I called the police station. Nicole called me back within an hour. She said both my biological parents were now facing consequences for violating the restraining order. She was filing paperwork for a violation hearing. They would both get court summons. She said the judge would not be happy about this since the order was only 2 weeks old. I forwarded her the police report number from the letter incident too. She said having 2 violations this close together would strengthen the case. She asked me to document anything else that happened no matter how small. She said we were building a pattern of evidence that showed they had no intention of respecting the court order. The violation hearing was scheduled for 3 weeks later. I had to go back to the same courthouse and sit in the same room. This time the judge looked angry before anyone even started talking. He had both violation reports in front of him. He asked my biological parents' lawyer if his clients understood what a restraining order meant. Their lawyer looked tired and frustrated. He said he had explained it to them multiple times. The judge asked my biological parents directly if they understood that any contact with me was prohibited. My biological mother started crying again and said she just wanted to send me a letter. The judge said that was exactly what the restraining order prohibited. My biological father said the email wasn't technically direct contact, since it went to my work address. The judge said that was absolutely direct contact, and showed deliberate efforts to circumvent the order. The judge extended the restraining order to 2 full years. He said the next violation would result in jail time, not just fines. He said they had shown they could not be trusted to respect boundaries even with a court order in place. He said if they truly cared about me, they would respect my clearly stated wishes instead of continuing to harass me. My biological parents both looked shocked. Their lawyer started talking to them in urgent whispers. I could hear him saying they were making things worse for themselves. He said if they violated the order again, he would have to withdraw as their lawyer. He said they needed to accept that I had made my choice and leave me alone. Walking out of the courthouse that day, I felt different from the first time. I felt angry instead of scared. These people had been told by a judge twice now to leave me alone, and they still thought they had the right to contact me. Their lawyer looked frustrated with them, and I heard him telling them outside the courtroom that they needed to think about what they were doing. He said they were going to end up in jail if they kept this up. My biological mother was crying, and my biological father had his arm around her. Neither of them looked at me as I walked past with Nicole. A month went by with no contact, then another week, then another. I stopped checking my phone every 5 minutes. I stopped scanning parking lots and restaurants. I started to believe it might actually be over. My parents called and said they wanted to come visit. We planned a weekend and they drove up on a Saturday morning. We went to my favorite restaurant and ordered too much food. We talked and laughed, and it felt like the graduation celebration we were supposed to have 3 months ago. My mom kept reaching across the table to squeeze my hand. My dad looked more relaxed than I had seen him in months. We spent the whole weekend together just being a family. No drama, no legal problems, no biological parents showing up, just us. When they left on Sunday afternoon, my mom hugged me tight and told me she was proud of me. Not just for graduating, but for handling everything that came after. My dad said I was stronger than I knew. I watched them drive away and felt grateful for the family I had. The family that chose me. The family that showed up for me. The family that never made me question where I belonged. I started going to therapy a few weeks after the second court hearing. My therapist asked me what I wanted to work through, and I told her I needed help processing everything that happened. She nodded and asked me to describe how I felt about my biological parents. I said I wasn't sad about them specifically. I told her I didn't miss having them in my life or wonder what could have been. What I was grieving was the fantasy that they would have been normal people who respected my choice. I had imagined that if they ever found me, they would understand I had a family already. I thought they might send one letter saying they hoped I was happy and leave it at that. Instead, they showed up at my graduation and stalked me for months and violated a restraining order twice. My therapist asked if I felt guilty about the restraining order. I said no. I felt angry that it was necessary in the first place. My parents came to visit the weekend after that therapy session. We sat in my living room with coffee, and my mom looked nervous. She kept fidgeting with her cup and not making eye contact. Finally, she said she needed to tell me something. She admitted she had been scared for months that I might secretly want a relationship with my biological parents. She said she worried I was just protecting her feelings by rejecting them. She said the fear kept her awake at night, thinking I might choose them eventually. I put my coffee down and looked at her. I told her adoption didn't work that way. I said loving my family completely didn't require anything from biology. I explained that my biological parents gave me DNA, but my real parents gave me everything else. We talked for 2 hours about adoption and family and what it means to choose each other. My dad sat there listening and holding my mom's hand. By the end of the conversation, my mom was crying, but she looked relieved. She said she needed to hear me say those things out loud. I hugged her and told her she was my mom and nothing would ever change that. Work called me into the office on a Tuesday morning 3 weeks later. My manager sat me down and said they were impressed with my performance. She offered me a project lead position with a team of 4 people reporting to me. I accepted immediately and spent the rest of the day reading through project files and meeting my new team. The promotion came with more money and more responsibility, and I threw myself into both. It felt good to have something positive to focus on after months of legal stress and family drama. I worked late most nights that first week, learning the systems and building relationships with my team members. The work filled my brain in a way that pushed out thoughts about restraining orders and court hearings. Kayla called me on a Saturday morning sounding breathless and excited. She said she had news and I needed to come over right away. I drove to her apartment and found her standing in the doorway waving her left hand. There was a ring on her finger. She got engaged the night before and wanted me to be her maid of honor. I screamed and hugged her, and we spent the whole afternoon looking at wedding dresses online. Over the next few months, I helped plan her bachelorette party and went dress shopping with her and her mom. We drove to 3 different bridal shops, trying on dresses and drinking champagne. Planning her wedding gave me back the fun milestone moments that graduation was supposed to be. We laughed until we cried in dressing rooms and stayed up late picking out centerpieces and arguing about color schemes. It felt normal and happy and completely separate from everything else. I met someone at a work happy hour in late summer. A friend from another department brought her boyfriend and he brought his roommate. We started talking about a TV show we both watched and ended up sitting together the whole night. He asked for my number and we went to dinner the following week. Dating him was nice because he knew the basic situation with my biological parents, but didn't treat me like I was broken. He listened when I needed to talk about it and changed the subject when I didn't. We went to movies and tried new restaurants and had normal relationship problems like whose turn it was to pick where we ate. He met my parents when they came to visit and they liked him. My mom pulled me aside later and said she was glad I had someone who made me smile like that. Nicole called me in early November. She said my biological parents filed a motion to modify the restraining order. They wanted permission to send me 1 letter per year through her office. I felt my stomach drop and asked if they could actually get that approved. Nicole said she would argue against it, but judges sometimes allowed minimal contact in cases like this. I told her absolutely not. I said any contact at all violated what I clearly stated I wanted. She said she understood and would make that argument to the judge. The hearing happened 2 weeks later and I didn't have to attend. Nicole called me afterward and said the judge denied their motion. He told my biological parents to stop filing requests that went against my expressed wishes. He warned them that continued attempts to modify the order would be viewed as harassment. Nicole sounded satisfied when she told me. She said the judge was clearly tired of seeing them in his courtroom. A week after that hearing, I got a LinkedIn message from someone with my biological mother's last name. The message said she was my biological mother's sister. She wrote that she understood I needed space, but hoped someday I would be open to knowing my biological family. She said they all wanted to respect my boundaries, but also wanted me to know they existed. I stared at the message for a long time. Then I blocked her account and deleted the message. I called Nicole and told her what happened. She said it wasn't technically a violation since it came from a different person, but it showed the whole family was involved in trying to reach me. She updated her files with the information. I realized something sitting in my apartment after blocking that account. My biological parents and their extended family might never fully respect my boundaries. They might keep trying different approaches and finding new ways to make contact. The best I could do was maintain the legal barriers and build my life around people who actually respected me. I couldn't control what they did, but I could control how I responded. I could keep blocking them and documenting their attempts and living my life anyway. That realization felt heavy, but also freeing in a way. My parents called me in December and said they wanted to start a new tradition. Instead of dwelling on the graduation that got ruined, we would have a big family dinner on my adoption day. The date was coming up in January, and they wanted to celebrate the day I became their daughter officially. I loved the idea immediately. We planned a menu and invited my grandparents and aunt and uncle. When the day came, everyone drove to my parents' house and we cooked together all afternoon. My mom made my favorite pasta and my dad grilled chicken. My grandma brought her famous chocolate cake. We sat around the table for hours eating and talking and laughing. My dad gave a toast about the day they brought me home 20 years ago. He said it was the best day of his life. My mom cried happy tears and squeezed my hand across the table. We took family photos in the living room and I felt grateful for every single person there. These were the people who chose me and showed up for me and never made me question where I belonged. This was my real family, and nothing about biology could ever change that. A year passed and I barely thought about my biological parents anymore. Work kept me busy with new projects and client presentations. I got promoted to senior marketing associate with my own office and a team of 3 people reporting to me. My boyfriend and I celebrated our 1-year anniversary at the same restaurant where we had our first date. He met my parents over the holidays and they loved him immediately. My mom pulled me aside in the kitchen and said she could see how happy I was. The restraining order had 6 months left and I already planned to file for a renewal. My biological parents stayed quiet the whole time. No letters, no surprise visits, no attempts through other family members. Part of me wondered if they finally understood, but I knew better than to let my guard down completely. Kayla's wedding arrived in early fall and I stood next to her in a bridesmaid dress holding her bouquet while she said her vows. The reception was at a barn decorated with string lights and wildflowers. When it came time for the maid of honor speech, I walked up to the microphone feeling nervous but ready. I talked about how Kayla showed up for me during the hardest time of my life. I said real family isn't about biology or DNA tests. Real family is the people who answer your phone calls at 2 in the morning. Real family is the people who sit with you in courtrooms and help you change your locks and remind you that you're not crazy for setting boundaries. Real family shows up consistently without needing to be asked. I looked out at the crowd and saw my parents sitting at their table. My mom had tears running down her face and she mouthed the words, "I love you." My dad smiled and nodded like he was proud. I finished the speech and everyone clapped and Kayla hugged me so tight I could barely breathe. My boyfriend and I found a bigger apartment closer to both our jobs. 2 bedrooms with actual closet space and a dishwasher that worked. We signed the lease and I felt good about the fresh start. I didn't tell my aunt and uncle the new address right away. I gave it to my parents and Kayla and left it at that for the first few months. My biological parents had never been to this building. They didn't know what neighborhood I lived in now. They had no idea where to find me, and that felt safe. I decorated the living room with plants and hung photos of my real family on the walls. Every morning, I woke up in a home that belonged to me and my boyfriend, and nobody else had claim to it. My life felt really good for the first time since graduation. I had people around me who I chose and who chose me back. My parents called every Sunday just to check in. Kayla and I got lunch twice a month and talked about everything except my biological parents. Work challenged me in ways that made me better at my job. My boyfriend knew my coffee order and surprised me with my favorite takeout when I had bad days. My biological parents existed somewhere out there as 2 people who made a decision 20 years ago. I made my decision too. The family who raised me is my real family. That will never change no matter how many letters get sent or how many times someone tries to tell me blood matters more than love. I know the truth and I'm done explaining it to anyone.